Hi everyone, this is Jewish Talk coming to you from NASA Community College on 90.3 WHPC. We're also streaming on the nccradio.org. Wherever, just search out there for 90.3 WHPC, you will find us. This program is later archived on Spreaker.com. As you well know, the program is repeated on Sunday evenings at 11 p.m. So if you're listening then, hello, good evening. If you're listening in the morning, good morning. As you all know, this is Rabbi Perl. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And of course, we really appreciate you joining us. And Gewalt, how could I forget? You can go right now to Facebook Live and see us in the studio. I'm waving right now to everybody out there on WHPC Facebook, as well as my own page on Anshul Pearl, facebook.com/Anshul Pearl. So hello on the radio, hello online, and hello to the world. Boker Tov to Eitan Kilshevsky. I had no idea he speaks Hebrew. Today, dear friends, we have a program that will cover the Titanic, my friends, the Titan tragedy. We will also talk about what happens if you never get angry. And number 3, my friends, I stand by if you have enough patience and gedult and hang in with our program today. We will also be discussing if your kids are not turning out the way you like. Do you have a right, or can you use your will, your finance, so to speak, to incentivize these kids? Stay tuned. But let's turn around and talk about the Titanic. And, of course, the tragedy that happened this past week. Let's go back now to 1912. I know that Zalma Weg remembers it very well. It was April 15th at the 28th day of Nisan, 5672, 1912, at 2:20 a.m. The most luxurious ocean liner of its time, considered by some to be unthinkable, succumbed to the icy North Atlantic waters. An estimated 1,514 of the 2,224 people on board perished that silent night, leaving only over 710 survivors. I know that the exact numbers are really unknown. The Titanic disaster had gripped the imagination of generations for the past 100 years. There's been books, articles, films, specials, museum exhibits, ocean cruises, commemorations. I remember going with my wife on I think it was in Chicago, and we went to see our children. It was a simcha, but nevertheless we took some time out because there was the very famous Titanic exhibition. And unbelievable. All kinds of filmed expeditions to the people have gone to where the Titanic has sunk. And the images captured there have continued to intrigue millions. Every smallest detail about the ship and the events of that fateful night continue to be analyzed and mesmerized so many vast audiences. So, 100 years after the ship hit an iceberg, and 14 years after the death of the last Titanic survivor, the disaster feels as familiar as if it happened yesterday. But the most intriguing part for so many was the ability to descend 13,000 feet to see the actual Titanic, laying there on the floor of the ocean, silently still there after 111 years later. It was this week when such a journey to go visit the remains of the Titanic ended up, sadly, in tragic disaster, when 5 people lost their lives not far from the original Titanic. The Titan, this submersible, whatever you want to call it, took 5 passengers last Sunday, June 18th, the 29th day of Sivan. It took them 13,000 feet below sea level to observe the original Titanic, which, as I said, lay on the ocean floor for the last 111 years. since that dark night going back. After setting off to tour the wreckage of the Titanic on last Sunday, it disappeared. As we know now, it experienced a catastrophic implosion. On Thursday, an ROV, or remote operated vehicle from the vessel Horizon Arctic, discovered the tail cone of the Titan submersible approximately 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic on the seafloor. The ROV subsequently found additional debris. The Titan, named after Titanic, was a 22-foot-long, 20,000-pound submersible owned by the Ocean Gate Expeditions, a Titanic tourism company that takes guests on these underwater journeys for what in my synagogue is the basic membership, $250,000 per person. Just joking, everybody. Take it easy now. Take it easy. We don't charge $250,000 for a membership. We just charge $200,000. On Sunday, 5 crew members boarded this Titan sub with the hopes of seeing the remains of the Titanic that lies around 13,000 feet in the ocean. The submersible, which doesn't have a GPS and receives directions over a text messages from a support ship, lost contact with the crew on the surface shortly after its departure. As search crews from the U.S. and Canada flooded the area in the days that followed, concerns began to grow about the submersible's status and its dwindling oxygen supply. The 5 passengers who died included the Ocean Gate's CEO Stockton Rush, the British businessman Hamish Harding, French diver Paul-Henri Nargeolet, as well as the British-Pakistani businessman Shahdaza Dawood and his 19-year-old son, Suleiman. Of all the disasters, my friends, why does this one still fascinate us so 111 years later? Why did the 5 victims choose to take such a risk to descend into these scary depths? Drama is created by collisions. Yet many collisions in history have not lived on with the same allure of the Titanic. Drama is also created by the unexpected, by the unbelievable. Yet for some reason, the story of the Titanic, more than many other astounding events, has become embedded in our consciousness, and our memory of it has become as huge and as flamboyant as the great ship that lies in ragged ruins at the bottom of the Atlantic. The story has defied the rules of history, brightening rather than fading with time. Excuse me. We are obsessed with the Titanic, and now obsessed with why we are obsessed. And people are ready to take dangerous risks to get a glimpse of that unsinkable ship. It is because of the mystique. I'm questioning, is it because of the mystique of the sea, the enigma of our close but mysterious neighbor, the ocean depths, hiding in its womb secrets of all the ages? Maybe it's the sheer power of the nature humbling man, the massive sea swallowing up the largest man-made object on Earth, the big Titanic. Maybe it's the collision of man attempting to conquer nature, basically intruding on the sea's domain, and nature responding with a vengeance, consuming in less than 3 hours this 46,000-ton ship, which took 3,000 men to build in 2 years, together with all the uniqueness, the excessive pride, and the grandeur of the Titanic and the mystic of its lost era. Maybe it's the collision of the luxury and disaster, the most unlikely scenario of the largest and most luxurious ship with some of the most famous millionaires and aristocrats of the time, foundering on its maiden voyage. As they hit the iceberg, all fades away into oblivion. Maybe to keep on going this way, is it the guessing game? What could have been? What would have been if they only? Is that what's attracting us constantly? Is it the story of the haves and the have-nots, of money and class, with the passengers representing a stratified society in miniature? There was the first, there was the second, the third class on the top, the middle and lower decks, distinctions that would have profound consequences in the survival rates. Just to what I read was about 60% of the first class passengers actually survived. So is it finally the tragic story of human hubris and arrogance? Maybe that's what's attracting us. And its tragic consequences of people who are full of themselves. You know, the ship, they said, even God could not sink because it was all lost. It was lost to an iceberg. The ship did not have enough lifeboats because the captain said, it's not needed, not necessary. And the 1,500 lives were lost because of this arrogance. Isn't the fact that the captain was warned many times about the iceberg, but he chose to ignore the warnings? After all, this was the greatest ship ever. Maybe it's the confluence of all these factors which captures in microcosm, better than any work of fiction, the drama of our life. You see, here's the heartbreaking truth now emerging. I can't say that I know this to be a fact, but I'm just sharing what I read Erev Shabbos, what I read about this. The Titan was lost due to the same hubris, the same arrogance that doomed the Titanic 111 years ago. And of course, staring in our eyes, have we not learnt our lesson? Kim, my engineer, my great engineer, pointed out to me that James Cameron, who directed the 1997 movie Titanic, has told dozens of news sites just that. Cameron himself has completed 33 submersible dives to the Titanic wreck and has experienced the dangers firsthand. And I quote, "One of the saddest aspects of this is how preventable it really was. There's a great, almost surreal irony here. Titanic sank because the captain took it full steam into an ice field at night, on a moonless night with very poor visibility, after he'd been told and repeatedly warned. OceanGate, the parent company of the Titan sub, didn't get certified," Cameron tells us, "because they knew they wouldn't pass. I was very suspect of the technology they were using," said Mr. Cameron. "I wouldn't have gotten into that sub," he says. People in the community were very concerned about this sub, Cameron said. A number of the top players in the deep submergence engineering community, and I know that Dr. Kilshevsky is part of that, even wrote letters to the company saying that what they were doing was too experimental to carry passengers and that it needed to be certified. But guess what? The warnings went unheeded. The Titanic captain was repeatedly warned about the ice ahead of his ship, and he just steamed at full speed into that ice field on a moonless night for a very similar tragedy, where warnings went unheeded to take place at the very same site with all the diving that's going on around the world. I think it's just astonishing. It's really quite surreal. And now putting on my rabbinical hat. In the opening of the portion of Korach, which was read in the synagogues throughout the world, we read about Korach and his 250 friends combined together to mutiny against Moses and Aaron. And he said to them, "You have gone too far, for all the community are holy, all of them, and God is in their midst. Why then have you raised yourselves above God's congregation. Korach and his followers do not name one thing that Moses and Aaron have failed to do as leaders. Their entire critique rests on the observation of a difference in status. This is their core error, the belief that leadership equals status. Korach thinks that Moses and Aaron have more power than he does, and he is envious. Where did he get it wrong? Where did he go wrong? To an obsessed person, holiness is a type of status. Proximity to God or ability to command are prizes for the needy ego. To Korach, the prophetic and priestly stations are a kind of a career, not a calling or a form of public service. So viewed from this point of view, anyone should be a priest or a prophet, and the failure to distribute these power stations equally is a problem. But as we all know, prophecy and priesthood in the service of what? Note that Korach doesn't hold the leaders accountable to results. He doesn't say you failed in X, Y, Z, and you can do better. Why? Because he himself doesn't want to be held accountable to results. For him, the power is an end in itself. He misses the point about Moses and Aaron. Of course, they had more influence than anyone else, not because they had taken more power, but because of their holiness, their refinement, their wisdom, their dedication, their loyalty, and their connection to God. The conflict between Korach and Moses is a pseudo-conflict because no actual issue is being debated. They don't debate ends. Should we be going to the Holy Land? They don't debate means. Is it the right route? Their rhetorical bombast aside, their critique is just entirely ad hominem. Therefore, the Torah demonstrates that they are not on the same team. The sin of the spies, which we read about last week, tested Moses' leadership. But at least the spies were motivated by a real controversy. Is the land attainable? They offered their panic and their pessimism, and it was challenge but it was catharsis. Korach's challenge is not. It's just a fake conflict. When we study the Talmud, we find debate on every page. That's what we're all about. As we often say, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. But these debates are for the sake of heaven. As the Mishnah teaches, Korach's debate with Moses is described as an example of a conflict not for the sake of heaven. Why? A conflict that is for the sake of heaven brings trust, brings connection, brings alignment, brings a buy-in, even when both parties remain convinced of their own positions. We are both trying to find the truth, to get closer to each other and to God. It is like a loving couple arguing about the best place to live or the best school for their kids, but they both love each other, trust each other, and want the best for their children for real. A conflict that is not for the sake of heaven is intractable because there's no sense of we that allows each other or each side to put its ego aside and say what is best for the team. Korach, in one word, is all about ego. Ego. For Moses, power is important so I can serve God and serve my people. It's not power, it is the influence. Moses is described as the humblest man on earth because all his authority is a means for an end, to serve Hashem. For Korach, power is the goal. He is detached from the source, from the oneness. He thinks Moses is just like him, as the ego is as blind as it is arrogant and dumb. So what is the lesson to us as we think about this? I would like to say the following. We're all captains of our own ships, voyaging through life, which is complicated, painful, and dangerous. The worst thing we can do to ourselves and to our loved ones is to allow ego to take over. I once heard that the word ego stands for the EGO, easing God out. The acrostics for easing God out. And allowing arrogance allows us to destroy ourselves. Every ship, sadly, is sinkable. And we need humility to get all the help, the support, the unbiased wisdom, and the perspective that we all can get. Every life is sinkable. Every marriage, sadly, is sinkable. Every movement, every organization, every institution, and vocation are corruptible and destructible. But as long as we can be humble, vulnerable, honest, authentic, and real, as long as we can get real feedback and act on it, we have far greatest chances to avoid the disaster, or at least to do some type of repair. So human arrogance, human hubris is a killer. You know, I also want to share with you, I want to first recognize Peter Hirschhorn and Lavana Cohen-Lichter. Thank you so much. And David Klitnick, good morning to you. And all others who are joining us here. Linda Zellickson and Gina Marie, thank you so much. There's another eerie side to this tragedy of this past week, of the Titan on its way down to visit the Titanic. This requires me sharing with you another part of the Titanic story. What I'm sharing with you is well known because it was actually depicted in many of the films. There were two famous Jewish brothers in America, Nathan and Isidore Strauss. They were multimillionaires, and they were considered amongst the greatest philanthropists in this country. Among other things, they were the founders and owners of Macy's. The two of them, Nathan and Isidore Strauss, were born in Germany, but they moved as youths to USA. The brothers, together with their wives, took a tour of Europe in 1912. They enjoyed all the cultural sights of the continent, the museums, the operas, the theaters, the palaces, and then they got the idea of going to visit Palestine, as it was known for a while at that time. They hopped over from Europe to spend a few days in the Holy Land, and as happened, wherever they went, these two philanthropists were given the VIP treatment. They were shown the holy places and the cities. They were shown the yeshivas and the artist colonies. They were given the royal tour, as is customary when distinguished philanthropists visit a country. And then, after a week, Isidore Strauss and his wife decided to move on and return home. But Nathan Strauss and his wife refused to leave. Somehow, the sight of the Holy Land and the sight of so many people living there at that time in such abject poverty took hold of them, and they couldn't pull away. So Nathan remained in the Holy Land. His brother Isidore went back to Europe. Back in Europe, Isidore Strauss was preparing to sail home to America aboard the ocean liner, for which he had also made reservations for his brother Nathan and his wife. And he sent him a telegram saying, "You must leave Palestine now." He cabled his brother this urgent telegram: "I've made reservations for you, and if you don't get here soon, you'll miss the boat." But Nathan delayed. There was so much work to be done that he waited until the last possible moment to make the connection. By the time he reached London, it was April 12, 1912, and the ocean liner had already left the port in Southampton, England, with Isidore and Ida Strauss aboard. Nathan felt, really upset that he had, as his brother had warned him, he had missed the boat. For this was no ordinary expedition, no common everyday cruise that he had lost or forfeited, but it was the much ballyhooed maiden voyage of the most famous ship of the century. This was the Titanic. So 111 years ago, on April 10th, 1912, Isidore and his wife Ida boarded the Titanic in Southampton, England. Isidore Strauss at this time was age 67. He co-owned Macy's department store with his brother and at one point represented New York in the U.S. House of Representatives. He and Ida met in New York City in their 20s, falling and remaining very much in love. Their relationship and loyalty to each other was described as something rare and legendary. Now they enjoyed their first-class experience in the Titanic. 5 days into the voyage, on Sunday after midnight, April 15th, 2:20 a.m., they were amongst the 1,500 other passengers and crewmen who went down to a watery grave. As the ship began sinking, women and children were ushered into lifeboats. Ida, 63, was given a seat and expected Isidore to follow. The officer in charge of that particular lifeboat recognized him and was willing to let him on board due to his status. But Isidore refused. "Until I see every woman and child on board this ship is in a lifeboat, I will not enter into a lifeboat myself." Ida, his wife, refused to get into the lifeboat, saying, "Where you go, I go." Ida took off her full-length mink coat and gave it to her maid. And she said, "I won't need it any further. I won't need it." And the maid was eventually rescued. The maid, by the way, tried to return the coat to the Strauss's children, but they refused. Ida chose to stay with her husband, a moment depicted decades later in the famous film Titanic. She basically said, "We have lived our whole life together, and if you are going to remain on the boat to die, as the boat sinks, I will remain on the boat with you. We will not leave each other alone after this long and wonderful marriage together." That was the last time they were seen alive. The couple were last seen by survivors standing together on the deck, holding hands before a great wave came over the port side of the ship and swept them both into the sea. The ship went down on the night of the 28th of Nisan, April 1415 in the year 1912. They left behind 7 children. Their memorial service at Carnegie Hall was so well attended that all of the mourners couldn't fit inside. The New York Times reported in May 1912 of this great, this funeral service. Isidore's body, including a locket with photographs of his children, were recovered 2 weeks after the tragedy, though Ida, his wife, never was recovered. Their family collected water from the North Atlantic in an urn and laid the two to rest in New York's Woodlawn Cemetery. There's an inscription that bears the quote from the Song of Songs of King Solomon. First in Hebrew it says, "Maim rabim la yuchlu lechabais eso avo, unahorais loy yishpat fua." Many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. Now, let's fast forward. Wendy Rush, born Wendy Hollingswheel, is the wife and now the widow of the Ocean Gate CEO Stockton Rush, who lost his life this week. Mr. Rush was the pilot of the Titan, which imploded and was found not far from the bow of the original Titanic. Wendy, his wife, listen dear friends, is the great-granddaughter of Minnie Strauss-Weil. Who is she? She's the daughter of Ida and Isidore Strauss, who drowned on the Titanic. Wendy Rush herself is the director of communications and an expedition team member for Ocean Gate. So Wendy Rush, the wife of the pilot killed in the Titanic-bound submersible, is the descendant of a couple who perished on the ship in 1912. Another eerie connection. Isidore Strauss died on the Titanic. His brother Nathan Strauss, as we've said, missed the boat. He was saved, but not really. The sadness over his baby brother's and sister-in-law's tragic death and the realization that he was supposed to be on that boat transformed Nathan's life. In a moment's notice, he discovered the vulnerability of the human being and his fortune. Nathan would never be the same again. He devoted 2/3 of his fortune to those living in Palestine at that time. He established a domestic science school for girls in 1912, a health bureau to fight malaria, and a free public kitchen. He opened the Pasteur Institute, child health welfare stations, and then founded the Nathan and Lena Strauss Health Centers in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. He also donated money for the creation of a lovely city on the shore of the Mediterranean. And since he was the chief donor, they named the city after him. His name in Hebrew was Nathan, and so they named the city Netanya. Netanya, my friends. It turns out, on a personal note, my father, blessed memory, discovered that all of his family was wiped out in Auschwitz, and later learned that he had found his brother was still alive. He had also made it out, and he was living in Netanya. The Jerusalem street, if you go to Jerusalem today, there's a called Rehov Strauss. It was originally called Chancellor Avenue, was also named after Nathan Strauss. Today, Netanya is a scenic resort city of 200,000 people, the headquarters of Israel's thriving diamond trade, and one of the most important industries in the country. And in almost every part of the city, there's some small reminder of Nathan Strauss's, his humanity, his philanthropy, and his love for his people. Nathan's son, that's Nathan Jr. Strauss, he passed away in 1961, attended Princeton University and arrived in the Heidelberg University in 1908, where he met a young art history scholar named Otto Frank. Otto accepted a job in Macy's with Nathan Strauss Jr., where he fell in love with New York and its brashness. But in 1909, Otto's father died, and he returned to Germany, where he fought in the World War I and lived to see the time when he and his family would have to leave Germany because of the anti-Semitism. Listen to this, my friends. One of Otto's daughters was none other than Anne Frank, whose diary before she perished in Auschwitz became one of the most read Holocaust pieces of literature. Nobody can ever understand why tragedy strikes good and innocent people. Why did Isidore and Ida Strauss perish in the waters of the Atlantic, together with another 1,500 innocent people? Why did we lose 5 souls this week to the Titanic? For Nathan, it was a reminder of how vulnerable human life is, how vulnerable human institutions are. He felt the need to invest in causes that would not be susceptible to sink. Nathan Strauss died on January 11th, 1931 in Manhattan, in New York City. He is interred at the Beth El Cemetery, also called the New Union Field Cemetery in Ridgewood, Queens. 20 years earlier, at a dinner in his honor, he had given what could have been his own eulogy. These are his words. I often think of the old saying, "The world is my country, to do good is my religion." This has often been an inspiration to me. I might say, humanity is my kin. To save babies is my religion. It is a religion I hope will have thousands of followers. As our hearts go out to the families of the bereaved, we must also take to heart the profound lessons, never allowing any goal or ambition in life to be hijacked by any form of egotism and vanity. Korach, too, was swallowed by the abyss due to his arrogance, his everything. Life is a dive into deep waters. Lots of pressure down there, just like deep into the sea. And it gets very dark and cold there in the sea. The waters are frigid, the creatures are scary, the environment is unforgiving. The Titanic lay at 13,000 feet. That's very deep. By contrast, the Statue of Liberty is 305 feet. The Empire Building is 1,454,000 feet deep, or tall. The tallest building in Dubai soars over 2,700 feet high. The depth for conventional scuba diving, my friends, is all of 130 feet. And that's way above average. Below that pressure, is unbelievable, is insane. Our divine souls come from infinity into the earth, and it's even a greater distance. And life here can be dark, can be cold, with insane pressures and scary creatures, just like in the depths of the ocean. We must ensure never to lose our connection with our soul and God, who always remains above all of the turbulence and the darkness. And therefore I conclude with the prayer found in Psalm number 68, where Hashem says, I shall restore from Bashan, I shall restore from the depths of the sea. Lot to think about, my friends, as I say hello to everybody listening now, and of course, let's see who have joined us on our Facebook page. To Cheryl Varon Kowarski, to Garen Dumbach, thank you so much. Let me go to a very, very, we'll come to in a moment about if our kids aren't doing the right thing, should we warn them and tell them we'll write them out of the will? Can we use finance as an incentive? Maybe I'll do that now because I think it's so important for us to hear. This is a question I often hear brought to my attention. See, is it possible at some point in one's life to wonder who will be coming to one's funeral and how many people will show up? I share with you about a Belgian man who took his curiosity to find out the answers to those questions. He took it to a new and frankly disturbing level. His name is David Burton, a 45-year-old Belgian man. He faked his own death and showed up to his funeral by stepping off a helicopter instead of being carried out of a hearse. Along with his wife and children, he orchestrated the prank to see who actually cared about him. To spread the news of Barton's death, one of his children took to social media and wrote a tribute to her father. Rest in peace, Daddy. I will never stop thinking about you. I love you. We love you. We will never forget you. No, the fake funeral was attended by dozens of friends and family members dressed in black, waiting for the ceremony to begin until they were met with a landing helicopter. The dead man, quote unquote, hopped out of the chopper as he greeted his mourners with, "Cheers to you all! Welcome to my funeral." Several of those attending were less than pleased with Mr. Barton's stunt. He explained, "What I see in my family often hurts me. I never get invited to anything. Nobody sees me. We all grew apart. I felt unappreciated. That's why I wanted to give them a life lesson and show them that you shouldn't wait until someone is dead to meet up with them." Barton's stunt was unkind to those who cared about him, and it should never be repeated. It was outrageous. But the drive to know what others will say about us after we are gone, and the anxiety over the decisions our progeny will make in our absence, and whether their lives and lifestyles will reflect our core values and beliefs, is certainly real. And there's good reason to be concerned. How many times do we see, how many heartaches of parents who worked, who sacrificed significantly to provide their children with the best education, best Jewish education, to raise them with tradition and observance, only to be told that they're now on their own and getting involved in all kinds of things that I don't want to talk about here on the radio. One shudders to think that these incidents will increase as the world around us gets increasingly more open, more inviting, and welcoming on one hand, while also getting more complicated and confusing on the other. So how do we respond? What can we do to ensure the outcome we desperately dream of? Certainly we should and must teach, educate, inspire, motivate, and model the choices we want to see our children and grandchildren make. But what about using our finances to incentivize? New York Times Magazine publishes a weekly column called The Ethicist, which it says is designed to provide advice on life's trickiest situations and moral dilemmas. So a recent column addressed the following question. Around a decade ago, my mom informed each of her children that she and I'm reading from the Times, she and the stepfather put a codicil in their wills, disinheriting any of their children who would get married with those who are not recognized in Jewish law. I believe, it goes on, a will is not just about money, it's also an expression of values and love. I have strongly objected to this codicil, or more specifically, to her having informed us about it. The two are thereby using their wealth as an implicit weapon in the service of their religious views. She says I'm reading too much into it. She claims she has informed us in the name of transparency, so we wouldn't be surprised later that it's her money, and that it's her money to do what she pleases. Anyway, though she concedes that she also informed us in case it may influence decisions we make. And this person who's writing this, she says it doesn't apply to me because I did follow through and who I married, etc. So the codicil doesn't apply to me. Still, she goes on, I have 3 middle-aged siblings who are all far from religious observance. They're not married. And I think they remain so, at least partially, because they're stuck, unable to follow their hearts and avoid betraying my mother's love and its most powerful signifier, her will. So is she right to have such a codicil and to have told us about it? So the columnist in the New York Times answers, the real question is whether the scheme is wise or decent. I fear that it is near. This is what they write. That your siblings now have an incentive to postpone marriage until your parents are dead raises doubts about its wisdom. That your siblings might marry someone acceptable in order to secure the inheritance raises doubts about its decency. No. Whom we marry, this is what they write, is properly up to us. Parents may express their views, coercions, though, is wrong. Does threatening to deprive someone of their substantial inheritance amount to coercion? Different understandings of coercion will come out differently on this, but it's too close to comfort. Well, I could go on more about this in so many different ways. Hypocritically, a year earlier, the same columnist responded to a question from a self-described liberal, progressive woman whose children had become ultra-conservative and refused to COVID vaccine and questioned the results of the election. She asked if it was appropriate to consider leaving them out of her will. So the same ethicist concluded it's not only reasonable, it would be irresponsible to let them inherit as they could use the resources to advance dangerous agendas. Hesta Maisa, Baruch Hashem, we don't rely on the New York Times to dictate our ethics. Hashem and His Torah and each generations and all that what we learn are our ethicists. So what do they say? What does Torah say about this? The Mishnah in Bava Basra, one of the tractates, states that if one gives his assets to others and leaves nothing for his children to inherit, what he has done is halachically legitimate, but he has violated the spirit of the law. The spirit of the sages as well is not pleased by a person who writes out their children and not giving their children what they, the inheritance. We have also Rabbi Gamliel, who says that if one's children were not acting properly, and as a result he transferred all of his assets to others, he should be, in fact, be remembered for the good. That's opinion. But the Gemara concludes, this is Baba Basra, page 133b, that we follow the opinion of the first opinion, which is codified in the Code of Jewish Law. And Rav Moshe Feinstein explains, discussing about a disrespectful son, and concluded that such a son shouldn't be cut out of the will. But he explains, and this is something that he also talks about a son or a child who totally is abandoned the Jewish life, whether that person should be disinherited or not. In any case, what is the ultimate discussion here is that today many children, even though they have abandoned the proper life, may return, or maybe their own children will return. So we cannot be as strict as they used to be because of today's Teshuvah movement. Many people are returning, and if it's not them, it's it's the next generation, and even those, maybe the next generation, they will convert and they will return to observance. So we have to be very, very careful. So disinheriting, some argue, may really not influence a decision in the proper manner, but perhaps would be less likely. And therefore, perhaps it'd be more encouraging for people, yes, even under those circumstances, to leave something very clear about what you look forward to in their life. And perhaps this would be a way to encourage them, not to coerce them, but to encourage them to do the right thing. So certainly you can see how important this is. And perhaps another thing that I've always counseled people, in a case where the children may not be in the right mode that we all expected and we worked for and put so much value to, perhaps to be consistent with what you believe in and write up a trust, to leave the estate in a trust that will support choices that you encourage, and that in those estate planning, to say, I'm leaving so much for the Jewish education of the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren, leaving money for them to go to Jewish camps in the summer, trips to Israel, things like that. These issues are complicated and difficult, and there isn't one clear or correct answer. Our ethicists have much to say, but ultimately, it is our hard-earned money, and we are responsible to be thoughtful, strategic, and even prescient, in how it is left and where it is going. Most importantly, my friends, don't wait to rely on finances being the factor that will trigger the choices we want in our children and grandchildren. Use resources while you are here, while the person, as I often tell people, if Hashem has blessed you, why can't you give it with a warm hand? Why do you have to wait until you have a cold hand, so to speak, in the box? Person's alive. Hashem has blessed them. Use those resources now to provide, to support, to enable, to reward, to empower a passionate, vibrant, dynamic Yiddishkeit that our descendants will want to cling on and to carry on. In other words, be a living example now. Many times, if it's not working, so to speak, with our children and grandchildren, maybe look in the mirror. I often told one particular person in a nice way, was complaining about his children and grandchildren. This person was a Holocaust survivor. I said, why can't you sit at the Shabbos table or at the weekday table at home, I'm saying, and wear the yarmulke? Wash your hands. Don't do more. Wash your hands and make the blessing. At least eat at home. Let your children and grandchildren see you wearing the yarmulke. Not just in the synagogue on Yom Kippur. Why not sit? You never know. All these little things make a huge difference to a person, and it's a message while we're alive. So I would say in general, don't use money that way. Use it thoughtfully, use it now. Give everybody a living example of what you aspire in a warm way, an uplifting way, in a caring way. I want to, every week I put out, so far, Baruch Hashem, what I call Deep and Shallow. You can go to my YouTube channel. So I want to share with you the one that really has brought a lot of reaction. It's called, What If You Never Got Angry? This is the question. I want to know, why is it sometimes it seems that we depict God, we think of Hashem, as a little child who's going through tantrums. In the Torah it says that we should not say or do something that is forbidden, since that will make God very angry. And the person asks, how can I respect a God who's on the edge of blowing up if we don't follow what he says? Let's imagine being married to a man who never gets angry. Ever. About anything. You insult him, he shrugs his shoulders. You are rude to him, and he's nice back to you. You give attention to others, and he isn't the least bit jealous. Would that be a wonderful marriage? Well, on one level, yes. It would be fantastic. But in truth, it wouldn't be good at all. It wouldn't be a relationship. If he never gets upset at you, it means that you don't really matter to him. If nothing you do moves him, it means he doesn't care enough to be impacted by you. Being in a relationship means affecting each other, for better or for worse. Your heart is intertwined with someone else's. If you aren't getting a reaction, then you aren't connecting. You may be married, but you're really alone. God created the world so that he could have a relationship with us. He made a huge gamble, creating us humans with free choice to do whatever we want, and he invested himself in us, allowing himself to be impacted by our actions. So when the Torah says that God will get angry if we do something wrong, this is the most beautiful statement of love. God is saying, you matter to me. Your actions touch me. I have invested myself in you. This relationship is real. We only get upset at people who matter to us. When your husband gets annoyed at you, take it as his way of saying you matter to him. You matter to God too. Let's keep that in mind. I'm getting interesting feedback from everybody on Facebook and different ways. So thank you, everybody. It is some tough subjects, and something that we should be thinking about, and in a open manner, but in a really true manner, and not to push off today what we could be doing, and push off for another time. Think about these things, and may Hashem bless us all with long life. Allow me just a moment. There are on a more lighter subject, and that is how our languages, the language that we use sometimes, many of the words we don't realize are connected. Even English words have a connection with other languages as well, and how they've developed. You can actually put a fascinating list of words that you probably didn't know have Jewish linguistic origins. We often use the word kibbutz with our friends. Does your babble ever lead you to big brouhaha? Kibbutz, babble, brouhaha are just some of the dozens of English words that come from Jewish languages such as Hebrew, Yiddish, Aramaic. And I given our personality trait of debate, it's no wonder a number of Jewish words related to speech made it into English. Like the word babble, right? Babble. Most rabbis that I know come from Babylon. You know that why? Because they always babble on. You ever go to a shul and the rabbi gets up, he babbles and he babbles and he babbles. So they come from Babylon, and living on Long Island, It really the message comes home. Where does the word Babel come from? It likely comes from the famous story in the book of Genesis, recounting how people tried to build a tower and called the Tower of Babel in English, that would reach the very heavens to wage war against God. As we all know, God thwarted their plans and toppled the tower. Back on earth, people found that instead of speaking a common language as before, they all spoke different languages, which sounds like Babel. Other people, you're babbling on over there. Another word, bruhaha. This sounds like the Hebrew word baruch haba, which means welcome in Hebrew. And many linguists believe that it was a dismissive word that French used to describe the sounds of Jewish people speaking Hebrew. English-speaking speakers adopted this French word in the 1700s. I know this would make you very happy. The word shmooze has the Hebrew origins. Shmuot means rumors in Hebrew. Yiddish speakers called idle chat shmooze. From there, the word evolved into schmoozen, meaning to chat, and therefore entered into the English language as schmooze, meaning to have a nice, cozy conversation as we are having right here in the morning. What about people say, you're a mensch? With Judaism's emphasis on ethical behavior, it's no wonder that many English terms come from Jewish words. So the word Jubilee, for example, the word mensch in particular means man in Yiddish, just as it does in German. But the Jewish version of this word comes with a twist, reflecting the Jewish view that everyone is capable of being upright, honorable, and making a difference in this world. So when you hear people being called a mensch, it refers to them being a positive, good human being. What last one is ruthless. This refers to someone acting viciously, ruthless. But it comes from the name of one of the heroines in the Bible, Ruth, a Moabite princess by birth. Ruth converted to Judaism and lived with her mother-in-law, Naomi, in Israel, where she displayed incredible kindness. Ruth's great-grandson was King David. Ruth became a byword for kindness. Therefore, ruthless literally means having a lack of Ruth's quality of empathy and giving. And with that, I wish everybody a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us. Lots to think about as we continue. Have a wonderful day.